Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome John Hamre, President and CEO, Center for Strategic and International Studies, and Dennis Muilenburg, Chairman of the Board, President and CEO, The Boeing Company.
Okay, folks, come on, let's sit down. We've only got a few minutes, and we want to get started. Would you please welcome Dennis Muilenburg?
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is John Hamre. I'm the president of a think tank here in Washington called the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and I'm very pleased to be invited this morning to interview Dennis Muilenburg. I'm really speaking here on your behalf to try to bring out some of the most interesting questions and issues. And Dennis, of course, as you all know, was just made the CEO for Boeing. He is the 10th CEO, and this is Boeing's 100th anniversry year, I think. So it's really quite a splendid accomplishment for Boeing, and congratulations to you, Dennis.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
You know, we're here at a conference concerning the Export-Import Bank. I remember the days, I've been in Washington for 40 years, I remember the days when Ex-Im Bank was boring and sleepy and nobody paid any attention. And all of a sudden, it gets caught up in a question of whether it should exist or not. What does Export-Import Bank mean to Boeing?
Well, the Export-Import Bank is a very important part of how we do our global business. And having been partners for decades, it makes a difference in allowing U.S. industry to compete globally. And I think when we take a look at industry today and the global dimensions of it, it's more important than ever that we have that kind of level playing field. I take a look at the aerospace industry, for example. Over the next 10 years, between commercial and defense, it's roughly a $6 trillion global marketplace. It's one that's growing, one of the few major manufacturing sectors that's growing in the world. Global air traffic, for example, passenger traffic is growing at about 6 to 7% per year. So it is an attractive market, but as a result, it's attracting more and more global competition. So today, as a U.S. industry, we need to be able to compete globally. And if you take a look at the aerospace sector, it creates a great trade balance for the country as well. Last year, about $110 billion of exports in the aerospace sector, about 6 million U.S. jobs. That's enabled by an Ex-Im Bank that allows us to compete globally. So it's very important.
You know, the opponents to Export-Import Bank kept saying that it was crony capitalism and that somehow it was a great subsidy to Boeing. Are you really the beneficiaries of this?
Nothing could be farther from the truth when it comes to that comment about crony capitalism. The fact is, the Export-Import Bank provides backstop financing for international customers who can't get commercial financing. Per treaty that governs all aspects of Export-Import Bank, those rates that are allowed, those rate structures, are required to be no lower than commercial rate structures. So it doesn't provide a financial advantage to international companies, nor does it provide a unique advantage to the Boeing company. It does enable global business, but most of that benefit flows to our supply chain. You know, you take a look at Boeing today, we have about 14,000 companies in our supply chain in the United States. Boeing's supply chain alone is 1.5 million American jobs. These are manufacturing jobs. And in a day and age when as a country we're struggling to build and grow manufacturing jobs, I can't think of a better investment in the country than to enable manufacturing growth. So this is not something that uniquely benefits the Boeing company. It's something that benefits American industry writ large. And when we don't have a fully functioning Ex-Im Bank, it hurts the American economy, it hurts American competitiveness, and in the end, it hurts the American worker.
You said something very important right now. You said we don't have a fully functioning bank. You know, it was in last fall that the reauthorization of the bank was overwhelming.
Yes.
A veto-proof majority, you know, in both the House and the Senate supported it, and yet it is still not functioning. Why?
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, and we certainly appreciate the hard work that was done by the administration and the Hill last year to reauthorize the bank through 2019. That was a big accomplishment, and frankly, a lot of people across industry that helped to advocate that. And the fact that that reauthorization was achieved with supermajorities in both the House and the Senate should tell you about the broad-based support for it. In particular, we want to recognize Senator McConnell and the work he did on the Senate side to allow that reauthorization vote to come forward. And that supermajority should stand. But what we have today is one of the functioning elements of the bank is the board that can approve any deals that are greater than $10 million. Today, that board does not have a quorum and therefore cannot operate holistically. It only has 2 out of the 5 slots filled. The administration has put forward a nomination for the 3rd board slot. It's a Republican that's well respected. And it's time to let that nomination go through. We need the Senate Banking Committee to take the action that it should take to allow that nomination to come forward and have a vote made. We know. And the fact that we have supermajorities that supported reauthorization, this deserves a vote. So we want to see that nomination move forward. We ask for support from all of you to keep the appropriate pressure on our congressional members to allow that to happen. And we need a fully functioning bank. Without it, we are starting to lose deals. I can tell you we've received letters from airlines like Ethiopian Airlines that says they will not be able to take delivery of jets without EXIM financing. We have had a number of commercial satellite deals, including one with Pacific in Singapore, where we have not even been allowed to compete because of the lack of EXIM financing availability. We are in a competition with countries around the world that have the equivalent of export-import banks. 59 other export credit agencies around the world. 59. That's what we're competing against. And when we don't have one in the U.S., it's to the disadvantage of U.S. industry. It's to the disadvantage of American workers.
And I'd also point out, folks, it's the only part of the U.S. government I know of that makes money. I mean, why the hell are we doing
There
this?
is that factor. It actually contributes positively to the Treasury. I think roughly $2 billion to the Treasury during the current administration.
It's amazing. Dennis, let me shift. We're having a very strange presidential debate here. Surprisingly negative feelings about trade. Of course, Boeing is in the forefront of this, but just take a minute to tell us about the trade dimension and how you're looking at this.
Well, we think free trade is very important. Obviously, it's one that has allowed the aerospace business to grow, but it's one that's good for the country. And I think in a day and age where competitors around the world are stepping up to augment trade, to build international capabilities, it doesn't make sense for the U.S. to step away from trade. Now, it surely makes sense to have fair trade, to have rules and regulations in place that allow that to happen. But that's exactly what's behind things like TPP. These are rule-based trade approaches that allow us all to have a consistent framework so we can effectively compete around the world. That's good for the American worker. It's good for American business. I'll give you again an example from the aerospace sector, just from Boeing's standpoint. 85% of our employment is here in the U.S. 70% of our sales are to customers outside of the U.S. That creates a very positive trade balance. Last year alone, $60 billion of exports from Boeing in our supply chain. That's the kind of trade balance that's enabled, and we can grow with free trade agreements. So that kind of structured, disciplined, rule-based trade regulation, as TPP represents, is smart for the country. And it covers about 40% of the world's GDP within that TPP envelope. So we think it's important, despite some of the rhetoric that we're hearing in the presidential campaign, that as a country, we support free trade, and we use that to grow American jobs. I can tell you our history says that free trade, open trade, grows American jobs. It grows manufacturing jobs.
Obviously, we're in the middle of an election where we've got the most angry voices in primaries that are dominating it. But how do you feel the broad base of the American public feels about trade? Are we talking to that constituency the right way?
Yeah, well, I think some improved clarity on the messaging would be valuable. I think in some cases free trade is getting portrayed as jobs moving overseas. And certainly there are some sectors, I'll say, over time where that has happened. and where some improvements to trade agreements and the disciplined rules base is mandated, and I think those things are in work. In fact, some of those things are, again, reflected in TPP, but it's important to understand that free trade is not to the disadvantage of the American worker. It's to the advantage of the American worker. And we know that when we are able to trade and export, we grow American jobs. You know, we're very confident that we can out-innovate and we can win in a global competition. Right? I will bet on our American workers' team to win globally and to be able to out-innovate, but we need a fair playing field to do that.
You know, it should be said that TPP would bring 400 to 600 million workers under supervised, regulated labor markets for the first time. This has to be in America's interest.
I agree, and as you just well pointed out, that rule-based approach where we can consistently compete around the world, when we have that level playing field, when we have a consistent structure, we can compete and win. Mm-hmm. And competing and winning means growing U.S. jobs. It's not about moving jobs overseas, it's about growing globally, and when we grow globally, we grow in the U.S. This is not a fixed pie kind of business that we're in, where you have to decide do you have jobs in the U.S. or jobs outside the U.S. This is a growing pie business, and when we grow globally, we grow in the U.S.
You're the 10th CEO for Boeing. Such a proud company. Where are you taking it?
Well, this is a great time to be in the aerospace business, and I can tell you, having accepted the baton from Jim McNerney, which has been a real honor, and over the last decade, the way he shaped Boeing and prepared Boeing for the future has been magnificent. And so today we have a company that's 100 years old and with a bright future ahead. And you think about what's happened over the last century as humans went from walking on the earth to walking on the moon, from, I'll say, riding on horses to flying in airplanes. We've been able to be part of that innovation globally. And so when we look to the second century of our company, we think about what's that next step of innovation? How will we continue to grow? And we know as a company, we have an important role to play in enabling global economic growth. And I look at the post signs around the kind of traffic growth that we're seeing around the world. We have about 5,800 aircraft in backlog today that represent that growing volume. So the opportunity for the future is tremendous, and we have an important role to play in enabling the global economy. But I'll go back to my earlier point that in that global environment, it's important that we can be globally competitive and that we have the right kind of playing structure to allow us to do that. But I see a growing, strong Boeing in our second century. We have the right foundation in place, and we're ready to out-innovate in the second century.
Do you feel that the air traffic control organizations around the world, are they keeping technically up to speed with the kind of growth demand? I mean, I have a feeling that we're going to run into a bottleneck here.
Well, this is one of the key areas of global investment. Again, when you take a look at global infrastructure, the ability to handle this growing traffic. Just give you a couple of numbers. You see GDP growth that some people say has moderated in China to the tune of 6 to 7% a year. It's not bad, but traffic continues to grow in China at about 15% a year. In India, 7% GDP growth, about 20% traffic growth. So in enabling global air traffic infrastructure that can handle that kind of traffic growth is important. Similarly, the modifications that are being done here in the United States and the next-gen system and the investments that the FAA is making, those are important investments. That kind of infrastructure growth allows broader economic growth and in our particular case, allows air traffic growth.
It seems to me we have to stand up and say we do have a marvelously safe air traffic control system in this country, but it is barely keeping up with this traffic, and we're experiencing some challenges about how people think about the FAA. Did you want to say anything about it?
Yeah, you can see that happening today, and as you pointed out, today we have a tremendous record of safety, and safety is paramount to making our industry work. So I applaud all the work that's been done there to create a safe infrastructure today. But growing the capacity of that infrastructure, leveraging the technology that's available to provide more volume in the sky, if you will, is important. And progress is being made there, but in some cases, again, it's being slowed down by approvals and bureaucracy. And also, I think some of the work that's being done on streamlining certification processes within the FAA, as noted in the recent FAA reauthorization, that's also an important step. So a good foundation to build on, but we need to make progress on growing a efficient, safe infrastructure.
Well, we've just got a few minutes left. Let me ask about the other half of Boeing as a defense company.
Yeah.
Where do you see this defense market going?
Well, right now, the defense market, obviously a tougher market than the commercial airplane market. But even here in the U.S., I think as we've had to deal with the brutal realities of sequestration, we're seeing more and more advocacy for alternatives to sequestration. And we do think that's important, that we get the country back on a stable, robust defense budget, one that can be planned on, one that is consistent year to year. Some of the recent reforms that Secretary Carter has noted, I think, will be an important part of that as well. But a dependable, robust defense budget, one that we can plan on, will be important for the investments that we want to make as a company. We do see international growth in the defense business as well. It's a very important component of it. And today, a lot of people don't know it, but 30 to 40% of our defense business is outside the U.S. And it goes back to this global marketplace. In many cases, the commercial and defense sectors are intertwined. The technology investments that we make, the talent investments that we make, are all enabled by a combined commercial defense infrastructure and stable budget environment where we can think ahead about making the long-term capital investments and talent investments. So we see growth opportunities in defense and space despite a tough budget environment. And then augmented with our commercial business, that combination is really what gives us optimism for the future.
Just say a little more about space.
Well, I take a look at the space business. Satellites and human spaceflight are both important parts of that. The demand in the satellite business is very strong today. A lot of that driven by desires for commercial communications bandwidth. Again, commercial satellites are a very important part of the work that EXIM Bank does globally. The space business and the investment in human space exploration is also important. Programs like the new Space Launch System, which ultimately will put the first person on Mars. The Commercial Crew program, again, both funded by NASA, are important partnerships. We think investing in human space exploration is an important part of what our country should be doing, not only for the value of those missions, but think about the innovation and the technology it drives and the talent that it drives. It is one of the best ways to attract talent to science and technology careers is investing in the space business.
You know, I'm a defense guy. I spent 35 years of my life doing national security stuff. I would tell you that I think the reauthorization of the Export-Import Bank is a national security issue. It is important for us to have American products around the world with partners that want to have American products.
I agree 100%. And if you take a look at that, it's not just about exporting our products, our airplanes, and our satellites. It's when we have strong global trade and when we're delivering U.S. products around the world, we're also imparting influence and partnership. And I think it's much more important for the U.S. to have that presence, that partnership around the world enabled by EXIM Bank than to allow that to go to some other country. So when we think about national security, the talent investment, technology investment, the partnerships around the globe, there's a pretty close tie between national security, global economy, and EXIM being an enabler of that.
This conversation could go on for an hour. We've unfortunately hit the limit. Ladies and gentlemen, would you say thank you to Dennis Muilenburg with your applause?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Well done.
Good.